Hey everybody, Adam Davidson, RadCast for Wednesday, December 6, 2023. Listen, I'm glad that we get to do this together. We have this little community of people who watch, most on Facebook, a few on Instagram, a few more on YouTube, and then a few at radamdavidson.com, which is the easiest way to find RadCast, by the way. Just go to the website. We still have websites. It's not all social media. And I want to thank you for watching it, liking it, sharing, commenting on it. Why? Well, because two reasons. One, it's way more fun. Like, it's just more fun to know what people are thinking and to be interactive rather than just me presenting a bunch of information. The other reason is because I think the internet should be filled with good things. And it's not that I personally am a good thing, but the scripture is a good thing. And just a basic conversation about following Jesus is a good thing. And then as you guys comment, it's kind of neat to watch people stack on top of each other's stories or encouragements or even challenges in the comments. Folks who don't even know each other, I just happen to know both of you. One lives in Toledo and one lives in Kalamazoo. It's just kind of neat. So anyway, listen to these words from Hebrews as we consider that we're in the season of Advent of waiting for Jesus to return. Just as our brothers and sisters of the Old Testament were waiting for the Messiah. He came. It was a wonderful thing. It still is. We have Emmanuel, God with us, Christ in us, the hope of glory. At the same time, though, we can relate to their tension because we too are waiting for the Messiah to come back and reconcile all things. In other words, things today are not the way that they should be. This is not the world that God intended. The world that God intended was perfect, harmony between Him and us and each other, us and nature. All these things there was nothing broken. Now things are kind of fractured. It's one person described in something I read yesterday that the world has been broken in the way that a giant wave will wash away the details of a sandcastle. You might see that it's still there. The essence is certainly still present, but it's just not the same. It's not quite the way it was designed. Yet God is redeeming all this through Christ. So until then, we live here. And in the season of Advent, it's a great time to remember we live here, and it's not perfect, and yet it is still good. There are times where we are encouraged and just floating, and we just have this sense of God's presence and victory in our lives, and it's an easy three-pointer, right? Even a half-court shot. There are other times where we're right next to the basket, and we just miss and miss and miss. If that's kind of where you're at, if you're just feeling like you're kind of down in the dumps a little bit or having a hard time pushing through and need encouragement, listen to this strange encouragement from Hebrews. And when you hear this, it is strange because it talks about bad things, but the good results. Anyway, I've said enough. Let's let the scripture speak for itself. This is Hebrews 10:32 to 35. Remember those earlier days after you had received the light, when you endured in great conflict, full of suffering. Sometimes you were publicly exposed to insult and persecution. At other times, you stood side by side with those who were so treated. You suffered along with those in prison and joyfully accepted the confiscation of your property because you knew yourselves had better and lasting possessions. So do not throw away your confidence. It will be richly rewarded. And that's the word of the Lord. It's like the writer is saying, hey, remember when you made that faith decision? Remember when Christ came into your life and you became a disciple? And stuff didn't get easier. I mean, in some ways it did, but in other ways it got more challenging. He says, remember how you endured great conflict full of suffering? Remember how people made fun of you and commented publicly about your faith and even insulted you and people were put in prison because of their faith, and maybe sometimes that was you and sometimes that was your friends. And remember how they came and they took your stuff because you claimed to follow Jesus, to follow this Messiah? But it didn't bother you. Your feathers were not ruffled. Why is that? It was because you knew that you had something new and better and lasting. You knew that this world is not your home. You knew that Jesus is the truth. And you didn't rely on your feelings to decide whether that was true or not. You didn't decide on how you felt that day as to whether you would truly be a disciple. Because discipleship is not selective. It is commitment. It is covenant. You're saying for better, for worse, sickness and health, just like a marriage covenant, you're saying to Jesus, my experience aside, I will follow you and I will trust you with my life. And there are times where that is an absolute joy, even in the hard stuff. Do you remember they took the farm, the family farm from us just because we claimed to follow Jesus? Yeah. But do you remember how much peace and joy we had in that? It was almost like it was like jokes on them because we know that we have something better. It's a weird mindset to have, one that only comes from having the Spirit in us, transforming us and changing the way that we see ourselves and this temporary world around us as it is. So I remind us during this Advent season to remember that the world that we live in is not our home, that Christ is coming to reconcile all things, that he is victorious over sin and death, that he is our substitution, our atonement, that he's our sacrifice so we can be right with God, and that he's our example, that he shows us how to live in this world, a life of grace, compassion, love, and generosity. And until then, we live in this tension, waiting for his return, and we ourselves carrying out the work of Christ, not seeing everything around us as this is it, this is permanent, but certainly as temporary, the way things are. And so I remind you of those times when your faith was so white hot that someone just looked at you and they would catch fire. I mean, they were just so, your faith was so powerful. It was what God was doing in you. And then maybe it cooled and you went through a cycle and it wasn't so great. If you're there right now, it's okay. First of all, don't just remember the cool stuff and the good times, even if they were bad. Remember how faithful God was. He will be faithful again. And then what you want to really be able to do is look back on this era in your life and you say, man, there was just that December of 2023 when life was rough and it just seemed like there was no easy way out and the tension was overwhelming. I want us to be able to look back and say, God was faithful in that. And if anything, I became more like Christ as he challenged and shaped and molded me. This is my challenge to you, dear friends. Remember, that's RadCast.